Welcome back to Razm Afsar TV. Today I'm having Beat back on our channel. Hi Beat, how are you? Greetings to Australia.
I'm good. It's what is it? It's 11:42 p.m. here, and it's still 28.9 degrees in my house.
In Celsius, right?
Yeah. In Celsius. Exactly. It was up around 32 degrees outside today.
Today, I mean, this morning here, it was when I got out and I was driving my car told me -7.
Oh,
it's so cold, you know. I just said, what the hell? You know, it's like fridge outside. It feels like you're in a fridge. That cold is now. Oh, yeah. Terrible, right? Really bad.
It's shocking. Though, to be honest, right at the moment, I could do with that because it's much easier to stay warm than it is to cool down.
Yes, absolutely.
There's only so many cold showers you can take a day before you wash away.
That's true. That's true. We are going to discuss and talk about ZOLFAQAR, the legendary sword of Hazrat Ali, which has a huge significance for all Muslims, not only Shiites, but also Sunnis. Hazrat Ali as a symbol of bravery, a powerful symbol of Jawal Mahdi and Fu-tuvvatnāme, and his sword is something which is very often depicted in Persian miniatures, in Mughal miniatures, and so we see that Hazrat Ali painted. And because, you know, there is always a discussion if Hazrat Ali can be painted. Well, in Persian miniatures, as we have shown, in Iran, they always paint him also with facial feature, right? So this is something specific for some of our other colleagues from other Arab countries. So in Iran, the tradition is there that they depict it. We have shown it, and we are going today to see it from Pur Rahnama, the miniatures. The whole idea about ZOLFAQAR is in Persian miniatures, starting also even earlier than Timurid, that they show it bifurcated, a bifurcated blade. So we are going to see what does this bifurcation look like, two-pronged, and how it is. So let us just go ahead, Beat. We are going to, I have lots of information I will be showing also from an academic article I wrote some years ago on ZOLFAQAR. Yeah. But before we go ahead, we are going to share something from Topkapi Palace Museum.
Oh, good.
You see that before we go there, you see that we have from top down, we have the first Caliph, Abu Bakr, sword attributed to it. Okay, I need to say the hilts and the quillions were changed during the Ottoman Empire, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The fittings are all changed, and they know it. The museum says it as well. But the blades are really old. So these blades are the first one attributed to the first Caliph Abu Bakr. The second blade, which is here, attributed to the second Caliph Umar ibn Khattab. The third one is attributed to Caliph Osman. And the fourth one is attributed to Hazrat Ali, first Imam of Shiites, or fourth Caliph of Sunnis. So you see that this is the sword, which is attributed. Before we go ahead, I would like to show our viewers two important books. One is by this book by Dr. Uncha, and this book is called Islamic Swords and Swordsmiths, right? This is about all these Topkapi Palace Museum early swords. So what does it mean? Unsal Yücel. Sorry, my Turkish pronunciation is very bad. But then, so this is, you can see that all these early braids are analyzed by him, presented.
I'll actually have to get a copy of that for myself, because as we were talking before the video, swords weren't my biggest interest, but I do have quite a few swords, and I try to keep up to date on, particularly when you've got something of this quality available.
And so it has this collection of Prophet Muhammad, swords attributed to the Prophet Muhammad and Hazrat Ali and Caliphs, also the companions of Hazrat Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad. So it's there. But then there is another book, which is really a piece of art, which is The Secret Trusts. You see how beautiful it is. So it has, I'm opening it, it has a box. And if you open the box, then the book comes out. I'm going to show it to you. Okay, I have to say, the other book, which is not as thick as this one, has all the sort of companions as well. Here it has the swords of Prophet Muhammad, Hazrat Ali, and the Caliph. See, that it doesn't show the other sorts of companions because it shows other artifacts, right, attributed to them. But I just want to show you possibly, but let's go to the sword where we are all interested in. There are victory shirts here and many things, many other artifacts. For example, take a look at that.
Oh, yes.
Beautiful. Quality is magnificent. Look at this old blade.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. See, so this is really incredible things preserved in the Topkapi Sarai.
Yes.
And this, I mean, because a lot of these swords were transferred from Mamluk Egypt to Istanbul when Selim conquered Egypt in 1517. So that the whole kind of caliphal treasury, as it existed in Mamluk Egypt, was transferred to Istanbul. And the Mamluks were protecting the holy cities for centuries. So there was a lot of things that they accumulated, plus the fact that they protected the last of the kind of Abbasid caliphs that they instituted after the fall of Baghdad.
Yes.
Some members of the family escaped.
Yes.
And after that, the Mamluks, used to make one of them Caliph for his lifetime.
Yes.
He had no political power, but, he was an actual descendant of the Caliphs.
Yes. Two things which is important for Iranian viewers, for Arab viewers, Turkish viewers, and Muslims. These, especially for Iranian viewers, because in Persian miniatures, and there's a long tradition in Iran to show Zolfaqār, also in Turkey, in Ottoman Turkey as well. Yeah. Please remember, early Arab swords, like the Sasanian swords, were double-edged and straight, right? So please, I know many people still have problems, and I know a game maker just contacted me like 2 weeks ago, and he had tremendous problems believing in it. And I just said, look, there is one thing, you made games with Arabs, early Islam with curved sword, but there is one thing which is historical fact. So they were double-edged and they were straight. So this is, again, a sword attributed to Hazrat Ali. Yeah. If it is Zolfaqār.
And you can see also that the edges were parallel. These were for cutting. You could stab with them, but they're really for cutting.
They're for cutting, absolutely.
And the early books on steel making and swords in Arabic specify quite a few things like this about swords. And absolutely. I mean, because you publish books on this, that they talk about the colors of the watered steel and all kinds of detailed descriptions.
Absolutely.
And here we have the real swords, which you can compare to the descriptions and see how accurate the descriptions were.
Exactly. So just one more thing, if you look at these swords, please, guys, like many old swords, look at the blade, because they say it as well that the fittings were during Ottoman Empire replaced, right? So we are talking about the blades. I mean, they're old fittings, no doubt, but again, I just wanted to...
Yeah, they're probably 15th or 16th century, probably late 15th, early 16th century fittings. Mm-hmm. Because periodically they would go through the storerooms and look for things that were damaged. Mm-hmm. and fix them. I mean, you know, they didn't have quite the same attitude as we would today in a museum, but on the other hand, they were very careful about what they did.
Yes. So before we go ahead, let me just go and see the miniatures, and also I give you some information about how it came to this bifurcation. Historically, in Iran, there were two types of swords made. This sword, which you see, was a couple of years ago sold by Oriental Arms. And as you can see, that this is a Persian blade. As you can see, it's the so-called, we say in Persian, kongeredar, which means flamed, if you want to put it that way. And then there are it's also bifurcated. The bifurcation are two ways. Either one lies behind the other, like this one, right? Or the bifurcation looks like this one. Look at this. This is made of crucible steel, and I handled this sword, measured it, and published it. Is a very, very sturdy blade and very sharp blade. So it can really cut, and it has two cutting edge which hit you at the same time. This is made, we will see this sword. It's in one of my books. I think it's in the lexicon, if I'm not mistaken. Or
I think so, because I was looking up the lexicon the other night for another purpose, and I was just page through the photographs at the end. They're beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I saw that,
the idea is, if someone hits my face or my body, right, do two edges cut me at the same time, or is it like this, which one edge cuts like that, right, and the other one basically cannot cut? But if you thrust, you can also thrust with of course, with a curved blade over the shield, then 2 points get into you, right? So then
it wouldn't be pleasant.
Yes.
I noticed also that the points are reinforced on that one, so that they're anticipating they might hit a piece of mail or something like that.
Two things on this. First of all, on these so-called flame blades. In the Iranian museum, military museum of Iran, which is attributed to one of the Safavid kings, this is made of crucible steel. This is that sharp that you can basically, even if it is flame, shave yourself. Still made of top crucible steel. Because, you know, sometimes people, they always talk about from European context. Oh, if it's flamed, it's not for cutting. Okay, but these guys, the woods ones cut, right? And the second thing, which Pete mentioned, they are reinforced. And this blade, I remember, is really sturdy, sharp, and reinforced. So you cannot say, oh, they just made it like that, right? This is not.
Look, see, the problem is a lot of people only see pictures, and they don't get that three-dimensional quality and the weight and the balance. See, the thing that I found with the Persian swords I handled, the balance was virtually perfect. You looked over there and the sword went there. It was an amazing feeling. Same with Turkish swords, I found. And we had some martial arts friends trained in Chinese martial arts and had them pick the swords up and see what kind of techniques that they could translate from their training. And every time they found the swords really good to use, both defensively and attacking. So, you know, different traditions of sword fighting, but people could appreciate how well the swords worked. And I mean, you know, it's an interesting thing. I've probably over the years, I haven't handled as many swords as you have, but I've handled a lot of swords, and some are dead in the hand and others really move well, and they're controllable. You feel like you know where they are all the time. And it's interesting that you say how sturdy and how sharp it is, because that means despite the fact that it's meant to represent ZOLFAQAR, it is also meant to be a sword.
Absolutely. So then we move on and see, okay, we saw that. So there are two types, as we saw that, this one and this one, right? And then when we move on, this is from Ravāfez. We had already two different videos on Ravāfez. We talked about the armor. And you see Hazrat Ali here is now. This is a Timurid period. And you see his Zolfaqār. Now, the question is this Zolfaqār this one or this one? This is very interesting.
I don't think you can tell from the painting.
No, you can't.
And the fact that there were two ideas about it also means that the artist could have been deliberately ambiguous. But I don't think so. I think he drew it as he drew it. Now, if I was being simplistic and just looking at only the things that are immediately apparent, I would say it's one behind the other.
Yeah.
Because he's resting it on his shoulder, resting it with that arm on his shoulder, and he, you get the impression you're looking straight onto the blade from the side, in which case it'd be two like that. But on the other hand, if you were an artist painting a figure this high with a sword that long, how would you show it parallel?
Yes.
How, what technique would you use to make it?
Yeah, exactly. How can you show it parallel? That's another thing.
I handed to the artist that whatever he chose to do, it works. It's Zulfiqar.
Yes.
But again, as we often discuss about paintings, they're not manuals and they're not diagrams for making something. They're paintings to entertain and inform. And in this case, if you made a sword that looked like that in profile, it would be somewhat like that second sword. It would strike well as a single-edged sword, but if you used it in an overhand stab, you would have 2 points, probably reinforced the same as the real sword, and probably quite effective. I mean, having 2 points, it's like using a fork, I suppose, like a military fork. You've got 2 opportunities to penetrate. So if you're slightly off, you still might get him with the tine on that side or the tine on that side. So, this is an interesting, approach. But again, this would be so hard to
yes,
to work out what's really going on.
So then in the history of Tabari, Tarikh Tabari, it is said that the sword Zolfaqār belonged originally to ibn Munabba, who was killed in the Battle of Badr, and his sword was taken as booty and given to the Prophet Muhammad. We have then al-Jamāhir fi Marefat al-Jawāher. It is stated that Zolfaqār belonged to Ibn al-Hajjaj and was taken away from him on the day of the Battle of Badr by the Prophet Muhammad. In Rawz al-Jannan wa Ruh al-Jannan fi Tafsir al-Quran, it is recounted that Bilqis, a Yemenite queen, gave Zolfaqār to Suleiman, and this sword came in the possession of Munabba ibn Hajjaj, who was killed in the Battle of Badr by Ali, and then Ali took his sword. In the same manuscript, another tale regarding the origin of the sword Zolfaqār is told that the Prophet Muhammad took a tree branch in his hand and handed it to Ali to fight, and the branch turned into Zolfaqār. So then we have Bahar al-Anwar. Excuse me, Pete, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, for the Bilqis is what in the West we call the Queen of Sheba, isn't she? Yes. So this is a biblical reference. It's not something that was recent.
Yes.
So exactly. And the Solomon is Solomon, the Jewish king.
Yes.
So this is tied back to the Bible, basically, the Old Testament, for people, just so that it's saying this is really, really old in this story. It's interesting. There are so many different stories about how it got there, and we're only halfway through, I take it.
No. I just tried to give the whole origin. Guys, I wrote an academic article. Yeah. I hope it doesn't get boring, but I really need to go through it because it's about an important artifact.
I think this is fascinating because it gives you how people thought about it. And of course, in medieval times, people didn't think in exclusive categories.
Exactly, they didn't.
They could believe 2 different stories about something without any conflict in their mind because, hey, it's magical, it's mystical, it's divine, or whatever. I mean,
Then we have in Bahar al-Anwar, it is recounted that the Gabriel appeared to the Prophet Muhammad and informed him about the existence of a stone idol in Yemen that is kept in an iron case. The Prophet Muhammad asked Ali to go to Yemen and to bring back the iron case. Ali went there and fetched the case and gave it to an ironsmith who made 2 swords from it. One of these swords was ZOLFAQAR. This is, beautiful. I love that, right?
Yeah.
From different sources.
Now
we go to the Safavid period, because many of these also were made during Safavid period. Actually, in Iranian museums, you can see them. Close to the rise of Shah Ismail Safavid to power and the establishment of the Safavid dynasty, Kāšefi Sabzevāri, and this is an important book in Fu-tuvvatnāme-ye Soltāni, is his book. He said that the Prophet Muhammad had 7 swords that he favored greatly. Among them was a sword called ZOLFAQAR, which was given to Imam Ali by the Prophet Muhammad on the day of the Uhud battle. Imam Ali carried this sword all the time. Kāšefi Sabzevāri keeps saying that if asked where the grip of the sword comes from, one is to answer, it comes from Hazrat Shah Velayat, means Ali. And he, referring to Imam Ali, received it from Sultan Sarapayde Resāle, referring to the Prophet Muhammad. More importantly, many Persian poems and tales stress the heavenly nature of the sword ZOLFAQAR, that it was brought down by Gabriel, such as the poems of Farruhi, Ali Name, Ba'z al-Mashhadi, and Khusufi. So this is, that they all stress this ZOLFAQAR had a heavenly nature. Beautiful bead, isn't it?
Yeah, this is this kind of mystique of swords.
Yes.
In England, you've got Excalibur that magically appears from a lake in the hand of a mystical being.
Yes.
And you have Roland's sword, Durandal, I think. And so the concept of mystical swords that have more power than just a weapon, that have origins that are outside the normal world, is a real part of human imagination.
Yes, absolutely. Then we move on. Okay, this is the sword of Hazrat Ali, which we saw it before. Digital lexicon of Dehkhoda says something very interesting. And the lexicon of Dehkhoda is extremely important. This is the lexicon in Persian language, for Persian language. It is like the Oxford English Dictionary for English, right? ZOLFAQAR, it says, means, based on historical evidence, right? That's what he talks. The owner of spine, reasoning that the spine consists of different vertebrae. And ZOLFAQAR's name derives from here, since the spine of the blade had different nicks or incisions, meaning that he used one side as a true edge, and then, to defend, had the shield and the flat of the blade, but in case he couldn't do it, he had to sacrifice one side. And this was the false edge, as the Hema guys say. So, and then it gets nick, and then it gets a spine. That's why it was called ZOLFAQAR, right? According to the digital lexicon of Dehkhoda. It also states that ZOLFAQAR was the sword of Munab bin Hajjaj, killed in the Battle of Badr, whereupon the Prophet Muhammad took this sword for himself. Based on Dehkhoda, the statement that ZOLFAQAR was bifurcated or had 2 blades is not correct and is not based on any historical facts, right? So it means that it has notches, it has nicks on one side. So it has vertebrae. Okay, according to him. Okay, guys, to all viewers, we are mentioning different sources. It doesn't mean that we agree or disagree with these sources, right? Right. That's what Bida and I are doing. We are just mentioning different sources. We show historical examples. Both of them are antiques made. We show miniatures. And now we are showing textual evidence. That's it. We are not saying he is right, she is right. Or that's not what we are doing here, right?
No.
That's all we are doing. It's important just to mention that, guys, right? Which is beautiful. All these are beautiful. That's what all of them contribute to our knowledge. In Tarikh Tabari, history of Tabari, related that the infidels were close to victory and had surrounded the Muslims. The Prophet Muhammad and Sahl remained in the battle and encouraged their followers to stand and fight. Abu Bakr and Umar were both injured in the process and withdrew from the fight. And Usman, together with 2 followers, escaped and hid behind a hill because he was injured. Ali was in the midst of the battle and continued fighting, striking an infidel on his hand. Since the infidel was wearing a strong helmet and also defended his head using a shield, the sword of Ali was broken. Ali returned to the Prophet Muhammad, explaining that he could no longer fight since he did not have a sword anymore. And here he goes. The Prophet Muhammad gave ZOLFAQAR to him immediately, assuming he would not take it and use it. However, Ali took ZOLFAQAR and returned back to the battle. And the Prophet Muhammad observed his bravery and how Ali used the sword, thrusting and cutting to the left, right, front, and back. And the Prophet proclaimed, La fata illa Ali, la sayf illa ZOLFAQAR. There is no young and courageous man but Ali, there is no sword but ZOLFAQAR. And the text does not refer to any bifurcation of ZOLFAQAR. But this beautiful, La fata illa Ali, la sayf illa ZOLFAQAR, appears on lots of arms and armor. You know,
This is, you see it in inscriptions on mostly on swords, but sometimes on knives and sometimes even on. I think there's a chart I know that has the longer inscription.
Very beautiful. Yeah. So, and then we go again. I tried to get all the sources on that, right? I found in Majma' al-Ansāb, Šabānkāre'I explains that during this battle, the Prophet Muhammad wore 2 suits of armor and 2 swords, and one of these swords was ZOLFAQAR. Šabānkāre'I adds that sword belonged to the Prophet Muhammad, but people attribute it to Hazrat Ali. During the day of the Battle of Khaybar, you know, the name again changes. Prophet Muhammad gave this sword to Hazrat Ali. So everyone says another battle, right? And said, La fata illa Ali, la sayf illa ZOLFAQAR. Guys, we are quoting historical sources. Some say this was in that battle, some say another battle. So we do it on purpose. We cannot change what we say. The very fact that ZOLFAQAR was not described as a bifurcated blade in earlier texts reinforces the assumption that the association of ZOLFAQAR with a bifurcated shape is presumably influenced by another source, according to Šabānkāre'I. Now we come again.
Which makes sense when you think about it, because if it was a clearly bifurcated bladed sword, everybody would have said something, because that's a very unusual thing.
Yes.
But it doesn't, as you point out, these are just individual sources and they don't completely agree with each other. So, you know, it's always a matter of consensus and working with people to find out what is the most likely. But it's the most likely, it's not necessarily the most truthful.
Pete, remember before we worked on those Persian archery manuals, everyone was saying Borudkesh is the best style, Borudkesh, and then we found one says no, Abrukesh is better. One says Sinekesh is better. So opinions differ as well on that, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, when you take the total number of manuscripts, you find that the majority say Borudkesh, but the people of Isfahan liked Abrukesh, and they must have had a reason for it. So this is the thing. There are not absolutes. There are preponderances of evidence. There are attitudes that people from different times had, because at different times, you know, different things were more important. It's like sword blade shapes changed as armor changed, but armor also changed as archery power increased. And then when guns are introduced, then you see China and things like that, because it's a response to something else. But they're all integrated into the systems of fighting and the systems of the technology of armor and weapons. So one thing influences another.
So again, we talked about this is Fu-tuvvatnāme-ye Soltāni, Kāšefi Sabzevāri in Safavid period. He refers to ZOLFAQAR in this important Safavid period manuscript. He talks about different weapons, swords, knives, cards, and bow, but he does not describe the shape, not even in the Safavid period. It's important to take into consideration. The evidence of the depiction of the sword ZOLFAQAR in earlier manuscripts, there is other evidence depicted as a bifurcated blade in Aš'ār-e the chronology of ancient nations, which was written by Bayruni in 1000. Hillenbrand states that the only manuscripts are illustrated among the known versions, right, are two. The earlier version is in Edinburgh, dated 707 Hijra, which is 13078, and copied by a certain Ibn Qutbi. There is no statement about where the work was produced, and a copy is found in the Bibliothèque Nationale de Paris, dated to the 17th century and probably of Ottoman provenance. Hillebrand says that the latter example in Paris copies the earlier version of Edinburgh. Therefore, the Edinburgh copy, together with the images in the Edinburgh copy of the World History of Rashid-ud-Din, dated to 714 Hijra, 1314 to 1315, contains the earliest set of images of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, this is interesting. Earliest sets. In one of these illustrations from Al-Azhar-ul-Baqiyya, entitled The Investiture of Ali at Qadir Khum, Hazrat Ali is portrayed wearing a bifurcated blade with a slight curvature in scabbard, obviously Zolfaqar's scabbard. That's interesting to watch that. The sword is hanging from a baldric, not from his hip, from Ali's shoulders, and not from his belt, from the hip. That's the earliest version.
That's a typical Arab way of wearing a sword at the time. I've got the illustrations from that copy of the Jamia Tawarik, and they're very clear when they're painting figures of Arabs. They're always dressed in Arab clothes. They're quite sensitive to the differences between different nationalities.
Very nice.
I mean, Rashid-ud-Din had access to a lot of other histories when he was putting this world history together.
Yes.
And there's a lot of manuscripts. You know, because you keep finding them, that there are a lot of manuscripts in libraries that people don't even know about.
Yes, so it's true.
Really for us to say, oh, well, there's a lot of manuscripts he consulted that don't exist anymore. They may exist. They may exist somewhere. They may exist in the giant library in Timbuktu, or they may exist in, I mean, just think of how many books are in museums in Iran and Turkey and the various Arab states.
Yeah, many.
Because books were always important.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about very literate cultures here. I mean, maybe not as literate as we are today in the sense of the number of people who could read and write well, but still there was a large number of people that could read and write, and it was thought important to write histories. Yes. I mean, you know, write scientific books. There's just a ton of stuff. I was watching something about the recent discussion of the palimpsest of Archimedes, one of his books that they thought was lost, and discovered that it was underneath the writing of a prayer book from Byzantium, and they're referring to all the kind of Islamic and these are Persian and Arab books written based on Greek mathematics, but advancing them by introducing extra ideas and refining concepts and things like that. So it's a live scientific tradition. The concept of writing histories, writing books on scientific subjects, writing books on law and things like that was deeply embedded in the culture in all of the Islamic countries. And, you know, it does mean that sometimes you can find stuff that's absolutely amazing. But it is interesting that this is the first surviving example of 2 points, and in this case, a slightly curved sword, because most of the swords in that, I'm just thinking, yes, when they're showing mounted warriors, they often show them with slightly curved swords, but people standing around wearing swords on baldricks, they're almost always straight.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of illustrations. It's an amazing manuscript. I mean, it's one of several that have survived.
Yes.
And even the ones done 20 years later, where the actual quality of the painting is higher, but the detail is amazing.
Yes. We have also next to this, also some other Persian manuscripts that specifically refer to the bifurcated two-pronged tip of the Zolfaqār. We have Hamle Haydari, Battles of Ari by Raji Kermani, and Khāwārānāma, which we saw, Book of the East, right, which we talked about it, Book of the East, by Khusofi. Another period manuscript from 11th to 12th centuries, 1590 to 1688, Nuskhe Haftarvish. That's very interesting, extremely interesting book. the copy of 7 dervishes, there is a reference to the bifurcated shape of the ZOLFAQAR in the chapter on hairdressers and shavers, Resāle-ye Sevvom va Sartaroshan. They talk about the bifurcated blade in the textual evidence in 1590, 1688. It says, the manuscript tells how God created the Aš'ār-e, razor blade, with its own might. This happened when God created ZOLFAQAR, this says, 1,000 years before the creation of the world and Adam. He looked at ZOLFAQAR, and upon being looked at by God, ZOLFAQAR began to sweat, was cut into 2, became bifurcated, 2-pronged, and looked as if it had 2 tongues. 1 drop of sweat fell from ZOLFAQAR, and God created Aš'ār-e, means the razor blade, from this drop of sweat. Beautiful, isn't it? I love these things. Yeah. This manuscript clearly states that ZOLFAQAR has a bifurcated shape. There are also other mythical tales about the reason why ZOLFAQAR has a bifurcated tip. Raji Kermani says, and I love this one, that the sword, ZOLFAQAR, screamed with pleasure when Ali took it in his hands and became bifurcated. There are also reports that the reason for the bifurcation of the ZOLFAQAR sword is due to the ownership of Ali over this world and the afterworld, according to Kāšefi Sabzevāri. Diyanat says the reason that the book on Fu-tuvvatnāme-ye, the chivalry code divided in 2 branches, is based on the belief that ZOLFAQAR was bifurcated. Isn't it beautiful? It's really...
I mean, all this rich literary tradition around it.
Yes.
And the concepts that people have, why this happened and what implications it has. I mean, obviously, it's respectful of Ali to say that it screamed with pleasure when he picked it up. The early stories were more, what was going on in a battle, but this is the mystical side of it, the hidden meaning of why the sword was the way it was.
Yes.
That's really interesting stuff.
So the manuscript says again how God created Aš'ār-e with his own might. We talked about it, right? Okay, we talked about it. Okay, this we did. Diyanat, we talked about it. And then Aidan Lu claims that the very shape of the bifurcation of the weapon, that's interesting, Beat, according to our colleague Aidan Lu, can be traced back to Avesta, where the deity Mehr in Mehr Yasht, verse 131, refers to 1,000 daggers bifurcated and well made. But Avesta.org, which is an authority on that, provides a different translation. It doesn't say, it says 1,000 swords, not 1,000 daggers. It doesn't say bifurcated, it says 2-edged and well made.
Yeah. See, when you start to think about this as not being bifurcated, the first thing that comes to mind is 2-edged, because this is a logical and relatable thing, because there's a lot of 2-edged swords from the early Islamic period. But again, why was Ali's sword referred to that way?
Exactly. Then why not the others? You're absolutely correct.
There are a lot of other 2-edged swords.
They were all 2-edged mostly, right? So why are they saying?
Yeah, exactly. I think there may have been a few that were single-edged, but they were still straight-bladed swords. They look like 2-edged swords.
Do you remember De Khoda opines or says the reason they call it ZOLFAQAR because one side had nicks. Okay, it's his opinion, right? So there are different opinions on that.
They come from different perspectives as well. So De Khoda is talking from the linguistic perspective. How could you get this name?
Yes.
And some of the earlier writers are talking from the religious perspective. Why is this sword different, and why is it so important? So therefore, they're tying it back to religious meanings. There's not anybody so far that we've looked at has said it's a better way of making swords, because then we say, well, why is only one? It's like the 2-edged argument. It just doesn't add up. It clearly, there's a mystical reason for having the bifurcation. Now, whether this existed at the time of Ali or was only thought of a few centuries later, that's not something we can tell unless somebody finds a manuscript from the time of the Prophet that actually describes it as two-pointed, in which case there's no argument.
Yes.
But it does look as though the mystique of the sword increased as time went on.
Yes. And one thing is very important, because you know that in Persian culture, there is lots of interconnection between ancient Persia and then Islamic period Persia, Iran. That's very interesting. So I think giving some thought and analysis of Avesta is also important. And it says in this 131 verse from Mehyash, on a side of the chariot of Mitra, or one side, the Lord of white pastures stand 1,000 swords, two-edged and well-made. I'm quoting it, right? So I don't want to change the translation. They go through the heavenly space. They fall through the heavenly space upon the skulls of the devas or div. On the side of the chariot of Mitra, the Lord of white pastures stand 1,000 maces of iron, well-made. They go through the heavenly space. They fall through the heavenly space upon the skulls of the devas. So you see, so this is again 1,000 swords, two-edged and well-made, according to authority on Avesta translation. But again, we said that Aidan Lu translated it as, differently, right? He translated bifurcated or bifurcated.
I must admit the Avesta.org translation makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
And bearing in mind, when the Avesta was written, swords are only about that long. Exactly. So the difference between daggers and swords might not have been. I see, it depends on what word they used for sword or dagger. Yeah. So in modern Persian, khanjar or shamshir, they're very clearly different words. I think back then they used a word like tikh.
Tikh and like kareta. They used also kareta.
Yeah. So the terminology was different back then as well.
Yes.
But it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And later on, Shamshir, it was in Pahlavi, in the Sasanian period, they called it Shafshir, Shufshir, Shamshir. But it was in Pahlavi, but it was mid-Persian, not this early Persian. Of course.
Yeah, well, Avestan is at the same date as Old Persian. It's very, very old.
And now let's go to the book, which is extremely important for us, Shahnameh, Book of Kings by Ferdowsi. There are references to bifurcated or bifurcated arms, such as the arrow of Bahram-e-Gur, which is two-pronged. Although there are references in the Shahnameh to the two-pronged or bifurcation of the arrow of Rostam in his battle against Esfandiar, Aidan Lu is of the opinion that the original version of the Shahnameh, the arrow used by Rostam, was not two-pronged, but in later editions, to add to the mystical nature of the arrow of the Rostam, the arrow was written as a bifurcated one. But okay, I have to say our colleague Aidan Lu has very interesting opinions, right? Not everyone agrees with that.
Well, because bifurcated arrows were not unusual.
Exactly.
Unlike bifurcated, which were unusual. And I'm pretty certain there are Sasanian plates showing somebody using bifurcated arrows. I think it's Bahram.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I'd be less strongly influenced by this. And I mean, I've got bifurcated arrows. They're perfectly normal arrows.
Yes, absolutely.
But I don't have a bifurcated sword. And bifurcated arrows behave like normal arrows. I mean, the difference is, like, I think one of the miniatures we looked at it in one of the books that we talked about, somebody being shot in both eyes at the same time by a bifurcated arrow.
Oh, it was Esfandiar. It was Esfandiar, yes.
Yeah. So I think that probably, considering the antiquity of we sometimes call them forked arrows, that it's more likely that the Shahnameh was really talking about bifurcated arrows, unless it's a totally corrupted verse and somebody, when they were copying it, knew everybody knows what bifurcated arrows are. This word here looks similar, so we'll change it. That happens with scribes, but there are a lot of copies of the Shahnameh, and you'd think it would show up. It's more likely to go the other way.
Yes.
That it said bifurcated and somebody miscopied it.
Yes. So we have also in Garšāsp, Book of Garšāsp, they also talk about these two-pronged bifurcated or arrows, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
But as I say, I bought some points and mounted them on arrows. And what really amazed me about these are quite wide. I could go and get one if we wanted to look at it. these are quite wide, and they fly just like normal arrows. I thought they would plane like a big, badly balanced broadhead, but they don't. They shoot perfectly straight.
Yes.
The problem is you don't know whether they're going to go that way or that way or that way.
Yes, he doesn't fly like this.
Shooting somebody in the eyes is a real good trick. But as I say, I don't really see that there's a strong connection unless there's a strong linguistic connection between the two. I without knowing Persian and knowing how the words were used, because one of the things we found when we're translating the archery manuals is that there's a lot of leeway, because sometimes words are used in ways they're not used outside of archery manuals, and sometimes there are words in there that we were talking, I think it was an arrowhead shape that was shaped like a ladle, and for the life of me, and the two of us discussed this over a period of time when you were doing the translation, we were trying to organize the manuscript. What is this? Is it shaped? Is it concave? What does that mean? And it could just be they've written down one word and mean to write down another word that has one letter different or something, and you can't guess what the missing word is unless it's somewhere else used in the same context, and we didn't find it anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's difficult.
I have to say, regarding these books in Topkapi Sarai Museum, and in these books, there are two swords attributed to the Prophet Muhammad. One is double-edged, straight, and is 82.05 centimeter long, 4.2 centimeter near the cross guard, and 3.7 centimeter midpoint, so the width, and 3.6 close to the tip. The sword weighs 0.45 grams, according to our colleague, Dr. Yücel. The other is almost straight, has a very slight curve, invisible, actually, exhibits a very straight yelman, so it has a yelman, a back edge, and is 87.2 centimeter long, 2.7 centimeter wide near the crossguard, 2.3 centimeter wide midpoint, and 2.6 near the tip, wide, the width, weighing 925 grams. So it's just for you to understand, to see, but see the pictures in these books, really beautiful.
Yeah. Well, again, these are good weights for a fighting sword.
Yes, they are.
Swords rarely were exceptionally heavy. I mean, there are exceptionally heavy swords, but if you've got to fight all day, you don't want to be a 3 kilo sword. That's
of course.
But the thing, the width, so the perfectly straight one is quite wide, but not hugely wide. Like, it's not wide in proportion to the ones we saw in those silver plates and things like that. And its taper is not very great. The other one has a greater taper, but it's controlled, it's moderate. I mean, the thing that people like to talk about a lot now, and justifiably, is distal taper. So how wide the blade is from side to side and how that changes towards the tip. My experience is that certainly in the Oriental swords I've seen and the ones I own, distal taper is quite pronounced.
Yes.
They're not iron bars with sharp edges. They are in fact tapered things, and I could pull one off the wall, off the bookcase behind me, and we could just look at it. But they're much later styles of swords, so they're probably not as relevant.
Yes.
It's interesting when we go back to Rashid ad-Din, the swords in that rarely had curved handles. They nearly always had straight handles. And even like 100 years later, well, maybe not 100 years later, 50 or 60 years later, in the Jawāher paintings from Baghdad, Sultan Ahmed, generally speaking, the sword grips are straight. So the curved sword grip, though it exists in early swords, didn't take over, and particularly not in straight swords. The Topkapi refurbished hilts and grips have a very 16th century look to them. And when the swords came from Egypt, they may have been in bad condition, and they may have had to been cleaned, and their handles may have been rotting, or even just the change in climate from Cairo to Istanbul may have affected the wooden parts of the grips and things like that, and they may have had to be redone. See, it was the people doing it had great respect for the swords because of whom they had belonged to in the past. So they're not going to just go off and do crazy stuff.
Yes.
The fact that the hilts are not contemporary is just something that you've got to remember. I mean, I'm looking now at the section from Hazrat Ali's the book about Hazrat Ali, and if you look, the man that the Caliph is killing has a straight handle on his sword. There's no curvature in it at all. The ZOLFAQAR in that one, I think there's a slight turn in the pommel.
Yeah, it is.
So and this is what 1426 or something like that. Totally appropriate for that time period. Yeah, it's interesting. This is the whole bifurcated thing is so complicated.
So let's go to the sword of Ali. The sword attributed to Ali, all of these are double-edged, no bifurcation, is double-edged, straight, measures 99 centimeter long, 7.9 centimeters wide near the guard, the width, 7.7 midpoint, 6.7 close to the tip. Without the scabbard, look at this. The sword weighs 1 kilo and 615 grams.
So that's a solid sword.
Solid sword. I remember the heaviest Persian shamshir I handled is the one which is not a shot, and it's in one of my books, and this weighs almost 1 kilo 300 grams, 1,300 grams, which is a solid sword. But this is even heavier than that one. Right?
Yeah. Well, again, it's a 99 centimeters long. It's a big sword.
It is.
I mean, it's a bigger than average sword. It's got a quite wide blade.
Yeah.
Does it have any fullers?
And let me just see if we can go back and take a look at that. Otherwise, I can open the book. And in book, I have excellent pictures of that. This one, no fuller. Oh, maybe invisible. But I will look in the book because they have a very good pictures here.
Yeah. Because I know there's a later sword that was made to look like a Caliph Osman's sword, but it was made in the 16th or 17th century, and it had multiple very fine fullers. It was a work of art in itself, but it possibly was not intended to be the sword that they thought it was. It was probably just made, because that's the kind of sword they wanted at the time.
Okay, I see that. Large infantry. Yeah, that's it. That's this one. No, I don't see any fuller, actually.
Yeah, that explains one of the reasons it's heavy is because there's a lot of metal in it.
Do you see that?
Yeah. It's remember, these are small screens at the top of the main screen, so I can just see it. I can't see the
yeah, you can't, right?
Yeah, you'd have to expand. You'd have to take the background picture out and put us full size again for me to see it. I can see it's a good photograph of it though.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's interesting. See, that sword would be a good cutting and I mean, bear in mind when it was made, it's the same time as Viking swords were being made.
Yes.
And it's really got the same design, which is mainly cutting with a little bit of thrusting. Because if the tip was made very finely sharpened, it would thrust quite well, despite not having a long thin point.
Absolutely.
It wouldn't go through armor and possibly not through thick cloth, but you still could thrust with it.
Yes. Yes. So this one, as you can see it here again, this is not no bifurcation. not two-pronged.
None.
Right? There are also other characteristics associated with zolfaqār. One of them is the exaggerated heavy weight of the zolfaqār sword that refers to the mythical strength of its holder. Raji Kermani says, this is very interesting, that after the martyrdom of Ali, Hazrat Ali, no one could lift the zolfaqār sword until his son Hussein took it to the Karbala desert. The heavy weight of weapons of heroes has a long tradition in Iranian tales as well. In ancient Iran, Zal takes pride in the fact that no one could wield his sword and mace. Persian manuscripts talk about the weight of maces with the, that they were very heavy with the measurement man. These expressions, we can say how much is man. There are also different opinions on that. These expressions,
different places. Yeah.
That they're different mans, right? But
I remember when we were going into the weights of bows, and I found all these different references. And you kind of had to work it out from the smallest one and build up. But the thing that's interesting is that one of the articles by Shihab Asaraf talks about early maces in the early Abbasid period that was so heavy that only a few people in the army could use them. So really super heavy weapons were known, and they were a show-off piece. The other thing he said, that the maces had so much iron in them that you could make 4 swords from one mace.
You see?
Which kind of suggests that maybe they're a bit overbuilt, and they went out of use because they were just too hard. You had to be super strong to use it and really skillful to make it hit somebody in the right place. When it did, it just they were gone.
Yes.
But so the concept of a very heavy sword, as the attribute of a hero, is quite logical within the, maybe not to the weight they're talking about, but the fact that people train to build up their muscles. This was a thing going back centuries.
Yes.
Absolutely. So therefore, the concept that people have really strong muscles, it's quite true. And the people that had the leisure or the requirement to do all the training probably could wield heavier swords than a normal person could wield.
Yes.
But so maybe only...
They talk about Amud Bismani, a mace of 20 man, Amud Bistu Mani, a mace of 21 man, Amud Chel man, mace of 40 man, Gorze Haftad Mani, a mace of 17 man, Amud Sad Mani, a mace of 100 man, Amud Sadonavad man, a mace of 190 man, Amud Pansad man, a mace of 500 man, and look at this, guys, Gorze Hezar man, a mace of 1,000 man. Oh God, this is unbelievable.
Yeah, well, that's definitely getting into fantasy land, because a man's minimum weight was at least a pound.
Exactly.
So yeah, this is not going to happen. But again, it was an accepted literary thing to exaggerate the size of things or the number of people in an army, and everybody reading that knew that it was an exaggeration.
Of course.
So, but when he's got 40 and he's got 100, what we're really saying is that guy's one is twice as heavy as that guy's one.
Exactly.
And that's all you need to know, because you're not going to pick them up and you're not going to test them and you're not going to take them to a lab.
Yeah, we talked about it already. Do you remember that from Khabar?
Yeah.
And this is this bifurcated blade.
Yeah.
Again, bifurcated blade.
Hard to tell whether it's parallel or one behind the other. That one looks more like one behind the other. But
okay, so another one is they said another tale. Zolfaqār sword, it was able to change its shape and become a dragon. It is reported in the Khabar-e Mansur, another book, not our Khabar-e, in facing the fire-throwing witch, Zolfaqār turned into a dragon and became immune to the fire. It's interesting, isn't it, right?
Yeah. But this is the whole concept of a magical weapon, that it's shape-changing.
Yes.
Again, this is the thing that goes back to the Talmud, when Moses had a staff that turned into a snake.
Yeah, it's right. That's
So
right.
it's got a long tradition in religious literature.
Very much so. Yes.
So yeah, it's
It's
I
very
think from a
beautiful.
literary point of view, it's brilliant.
And we have also ancient Iranian warriors had weapons which could change their shape. It is
Yeah,
reported that Garšāsp had two weapons which could change their shape. Another feature of Zolfaqār is that it could inflict very severe wounds and was very sharp. In popular Iranian beliefs, it is said that many mountains were cut with one strike of Zolfaqār. For example, close to the city of Kerman, there is an area called Tagh Ali, which people think was created by a strike of the sword of Ali, by Zolfaqār. In one of the physical encounters between Rostam and Ali, Ali opened the Alvand Mount with the strike of Zolfaqār. One can find similar stories about the penetrating power of weapons in ancient Iranian tales, such as the arrow of Zal, which could go right through the trunk of a tree. Another characteristic of Zolfaqār is that it could talk after Ali took it in his hand. Similar stories can be found about the axe of Abu Muslim Khorasani, which said, Yahoo, after killing defectors. It is interesting to note that in Abu Muslim Name, this axe is called the son of Zolfaqār. Another feature of Zolfaqār is that in the hand of Ali, it could change its lengths and become longer and shorter as required in the battlefield. It's very interesting, isn't it? I really love that.
This is wonderful stuff. I mean, there are modern science fiction novels that have swords that can do that. But so it's a living tradition. The thing that strikes me, well, the arrow of Zal could go through the trunk of a tree. Well, Rostam, when he was trapped and fatally injured by his brother, shot an arrow through a tree and killed his brother. Arrows go well. There's the famous story of the siege of Samarkand, where Chagri Beg and I think it's Chagri Beg and Pur Beg thought that an archer had shot an arrow through the gate, through a wooden garden gate, and then killed somebody standing next to them. When this is in Mubarak Shah's book, when a few years later, somebody went and asked about it, and they found the man who shot the arrow, and he explained that, oh, no, it wasn't. There was a knot hole in the gate. I shot through the knot hole with the arrow, and then it hit the man standing next to them or sitting on a horse next to them. And the reason I could know where he was because his armor was so shiny that it shone through the knot hole, which was actually more difficult to do than just shooting it through the gate, I think. It's very hard to shoot arrows through small holes.
Regarding the destiny, go ahead, please. Regarding the destiny of Zolfaqār, the oldest tale is from Abu Muslim Name, where it is said that the father of Smith Khordak came into his dream and told him that a camel riding Arab would hand in a rusted piece of steel to him, and he would make the 30-man axe of Abu Muslim. He also explained to his son in his dream that the piece of steel is part of the Zolfaqār sword, which was thrown in Najaf Lake after he went to his seclusion. So after the assassination of Ali, the lake dried up, and that piece of steel was taken off as a sword. Throwing swords into a lake is a common mythical tale, as we know it, also in Europe, as you mentioned that. Based on Shiite belief, the Prophet Muhammad gave the Zolfaqār to Ali. Later, Ali turned it to his son Hussein, and then it was given to the disappeared 12th Imam Mahdi, who will appear again one day. Giving a weapon such as inheritance has also a long tradition in Iranian tales. Heavy mace of Garšāsp and Sam, which was inherited from one generation to the others, as you mentioned.
Yeah, the kind of handing down weapons through the generations is common the world over. And the fact that some of these old weapons had magical powers is also well thought of.
So it was a very short discussion and lots of sources we try to provide. We come back to the rendition of Zolfaqār. Again, guys, one is two blades placed here, one and one behind, and then the other one two parallel. So the question is, you can write in the comments, which one do you prefer?
Honestly, it's one of those things where it is just so interesting to ever find out how the tradition develop? Was it like some Greek stories where a word sounded like another word, and all of a sudden you had this kind of connected history of things that weren't connected at all, but the words sounded similar? And this is not uncommon. Well, I mean, you can call it folk etymology. I'm bringing this up because it may turn out that ZOLFAQAR at the time that it was used to name the blade had an entirely different meaning than what we think now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just in several hundred years, the original meaning's forgotten, and a meaning that is developed out of the logic of the words rather than the actual historical. It's so hard to track that down. I mean, again, there may be a madrasa or a mosque somewhere that's got some old books, and there is, you know, you keep finding wonderful old manuals, and other people in Iran are always discovering things that everybody had thought had been lost.
Yes, that's right.
Or sometimes didn't even know they existed, which is even more unfortunate.
Yes. Pete, did you like these pictures? And these were nice.
Oh yeah, I love those old swords. They're full of meaning because of the hands they've passed through over the centuries, and the fact that people, you know, really cared about that this is the sort of, you know, this Caliph, or in the case of Hazrat Ali, this very important person. And, you know, once it was owned by Muhammad, and then he gives it to Ali, and then Ali gives it to Hussein, and then, well, I mean, if the hidden Imam has it, then we're not going to see the real one until things become very exciting. Yeah, and the fact that in the Topkapi Palace, they had swords of Ali that were not bifurcated.
Yeah,
we know that they were his swords with a reasonable degree of because there's a long train of transmission from going back through the Mamluk sultans, back through the Abbasid caliphs. So it's, yeah, really interesting, and you've brought together a lot of interesting and contradictory sources in some senses.
Yeah, of course, they don't agree.
Fills out the kind of, this is a major series of stories about, you know, the good that Ali was doing by getting rid of demons and other things that were making life impossible for people, and the kind of trust between the Prophet and Ali. Yeah, all of these things make up. They also give, you know, lessons on how to behave to other people and things like that. Ali was a great fighter.
Yes, he was.
And I mean, in one of our archery manuscripts, there's a funny story about Ali and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, and these just show how alive these people are in the imagination of people even today, but through a whole, more than, you know, like 1,300 years, people have been talking about this.
Yes, absolutely.
And people have been making their version of ZOLFAQAR.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Thank you very much, Pete, for taking part in this discussion. And again, thanks a lot, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, see you. Bye.